Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about the Thanium Worlds and the 12th Cerulean Spear Command. This part of the galaxy is soaked with history. It's the western fringe of the original sector boundaries of the Tion hegemony before the Republic turned Empire split that sector into 6 in order to weaken what had been the capital sector of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. The centers of political power were deeper into the Tion cluster, sectors like Allied Tion, the Cronies Mandate, and the new, reduced Tion hegemony sector. The Thanium Worlds had always been a fringe of the cluster. The Tion cluster thought of themselves as the core worlds of the Outer Rim, and the number of major worlds packed inside the Thanium sector at the fringe of the old hegemony speaks to why. Illyrion is famous as a gambling planet, Vornax is a now barren planet that was once a major industrial world full of droid factories, until the Empire decided that it needed to make an example of at least a few Tianese planets, and Vornax was one of the unlucky winners of that lottery. Galadran is a snowy mountain planet, not full-on Hoth, think more fir trees. According to rumor, this was the site of a conflict between traditionalist Mandalorians and the Jedi, where Jango Fett fought Count Dooku and his apprentice Kamari Vosa, and Jango left an impression on Count Dooku with how many Jedi he killed that day. My rule about always including species homeworlds has come up for a couple of obscure ones in the 12th Cerulean Spear, so I'll mention here an exception to it. I don't include alleged species that only appear in children's comics or cartoons. It's not like it's impossible for real species to show up in these, but the Sumans here are most likely just funny cartoon aliens made up because the creators of the cartoon didn't want to use a real species. Since this is one of the sectors broken off from the Tion hegemony, the usual rules about species homeworlds getting their own sectors definitely don't apply, not that this rule was applied super evenly in this region of space to begin with. The Talburians are split into a race war between the blue-skinned ones and the purple-skinned ones, and the lack of unity has prevented them from getting much importance to the greater galaxy. The Burundi species of planet Burundi are documented only in Spacer tales. Sometimes spacers are racist. The Alzarians are a species of green-skinned humanoids whose only visual reference I can find is one of those kids' cartoons, but there are reasonably reliable historical records from the Sith Empire discussing the possibility of training them as Sith. Some guy named Darth Ravage had a grudge with them, though, and the Alzarians weren't so promising that other Sith Lords wanted to pick a fight over it. The Alzarians were also targets of the Stenax massacres, along with the Cadrillians and the Tharkos, who might be alien species or might just be the name of peoples from the asteroid Cadril or the planet Tharkos. Hard to say because there's not very many of them left on account of the massacres. Details on the massacres are hard to come by. They happened between Endor and Jakku, so that was still the era with no bureaucracy keeping track of things, so even though it's within living memory, it's all holonet rumors and spacer tales. The Stenaxis overthrew an Imperial garrison over a neighboring Spaja sector and started pursuing a bunch of racial grudges with nearby species. Rumor is the Mon Calamari came out and smacked the Stenaxis down. If that's true, it speaks to the extent to which New Republic forces absolutely ran roughshod over Greater Maldrude, even before the fall of the Empire. The fringe of the Tianese hegemony's maximum extent was also the fringe of the Sith core, the worlds consistently ruled by the Sith during the Old Republic era, even when the Republic, sarcastic air quotes, destroyed the Sith Empire, which usually meant killing the Sith Emperor and defeating the Sith fleet, and then, while the Sith Lords descended into infighting and warlordism for years or decades, Republic troops would fly over to Korriban or Zeost or wherever the capital was that time, plant some flags, take some photos, and since they had the run of the enemy capital, they declared the Sith Empire had been destroyed forever, and then they'd mostly leave, and the skeleton garrison left behind would get knocked over by warlords, or failing that, by the next time a Sith Emperor managed to weld all the other Sith Lords back together into one empire. So, the Tianese region of the galaxy is a fuzzy thing whose borders expanded and receded based on the fortunes of the Tianese hegemony in the very early Republic era, and the Sith region of the galaxy is a fuzzy thing whose borders expanded and receded based on the fortunes of the Sith Lords throughout the Old Republic era, and they overlap a lot, and the divide between 12th Cerulean Spear and their Tianese zone, and the 11th Blazing Claw and their Old Sith zone goes straight through the middle. And some of the Tianese sectors end up in Blazing Claw because they are also Sith sectors, and some of the Sith sectors end up in 12th Cerulean Spear because they are also Tianese sectors, like the Thanium Worlds, which includes Renvar and Felucia. Felucia has a native species of these things who have a dark side shamanin tradition. The Gossam colonized Felucia way back in the pre-Republic era, which is weird. They didn't show up anywhere else nearby, and it's also a hell of a hike to get there from their homeworld, which is in the colonies region near the core. Anyway, the Gossam set up shop in a couple of fortified cities, clearing the jungle to create farms, especially for the healing plant of Nicelin. The Gossam never got on particularly well with the natives, starting a pattern that continued when the planet was seized by Zim the Conqueror, then the Republic, then traded hands between the Republic and Sith over and over again. The Commerce Guild and their farming interests had a pretty consistent investment in the planet, as did, of course, the native population of Felucians. The tendril-faced Felucians, I mean. You might also recognize these Felucians. These are a Gossam evolutionary branch after a long time spent on Felucia, which speaks to the conditions of farming this disease-ridden, predator-infested death world, because evolution only occurs that quickly when a significant fraction of the population fails to reproduce, usually because they die before they get the chance. So there ended up being a three-way species divide: the original Felucians, who lived in the wilderness, the more rural Gossam evolved Felucians, and the original flavor Gossam who lived in the cities. None of these three like each other, and the conflict between them was a consistent factor regardless of who ruled this sector of space. The ties to the Commerce Guild and the proximity to the Tion cluster meant that Felucia went SEP in the Clone Wars. The planet had escaped a lot of the conflict in the Sith Wars because it was usually absorbed into a Sith Empire early on, and then rejoined the Republic with minimal resistance after a blow struck in Sith space. But in the Clone Wars, the Tion cluster wasn't a provincial fringe of the enemy empire, it was the core of the CIS. When Belderone stalled the Republic's attack up the Prolemian trade route, the Republic started looking for ways around, and the battle spread to Felucia and Ossus. Aayla Secura famously met her end on Felucia, which is famous mostly because both Felucia and Aayla Secura look great. Like, it was pretty much exactly the same thing as Stas Ali's betrayal on Salukami, but Salukami is boring. Look at this place, though. This place looks awesome. The CIS forces on Felucia surrendered soon after Order 66, once planets like Symirth and Megiddo began to fall, and the Tion cluster decided to give up rather than fight a doomed battle that would ruin their planets. The Imperial garrison was relatively light on Felucia, because Felucia is famously impossible to patrol and not very valuable once the Prolemian trade route was no longer blocked by an enemy army. Allegedly, Darth Vader's secret apprentice, a Sith assassin codenamed Starkiller, hunted down Shaak Ti here during the early rebellion. This story is supposed to be the story of the founding of the Rebel Alliance, but definitely isn't. That's a pretty well documented historical fact, and it was nothing like the stories about Starkiller. Plus, Starkiller is a codename some Rebel propagandists used for Luke Skywalker after the Battle of Yavin, when Red 5, the guy who blew up the Death Star, was the greatest hero Alliance propaganda had ever had, but people still wanted to keep his identity secret. Maybe they used the codename of a real guy who betrayed Darth Vader and helped the Rebel Alliance in its early days, but probably not. Theoretically, the story of a Sith assassin could be true, and definitely Shaak Ti's fate remains unknown. She never came forward after the New Republic was established and Luke refounded the Jedi Order, so probably she got killed at some point, but there's reports of her being killed during the CIS raid on Coruscant, the 501st Legion's attack on the Jedi Temple, or in the jungles of Felucia years later at the hands of some kind of Sith assassin. Renvar is another dark side aligned planet nearby. The Rakatans got this one, and so did the Sith, who left behind a bunch of outposts here. Ulic Qel-Droma's tomb is located here and supposedly holds secrets of the Force Harvester, an ancient Sith superweapon that the CIS tried to unearth and reactivate on Raxus Prime. Republic forces stationed here since the days of the Sith Wars in the Old Republic era were quickly repelled by the CIS, both to keep the nearby Tion cluster secure and to keep Ulic Qel-Droma's secrets safe. But Anakin Skywalker will return and commune with Ulic Qel-Droma's ghost to learn the secrets of the Force Harvester and lead the GAR in the battle to destroy it. This is a story presented as based on real events that came out during the Clone Wars, which on the one hand is a contemporary account, but on the other hand it was also a propaganda story during a time of war, so grain of salt. Particularly since it involves a Republic raid on Raxus Prime, a stone's throw away from the capital of the CIS in the early stages of the war. That seems unlikely.